Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're from. I'm joined today by two of my favorite Veeam colleagues, and we are talking about Veeam and Microsoft. This is Microsoft Ignite 2020 week, and there's a huge amount of activity going on behalf of Microsoft. Of course, Veeam is a partner, so we're going to be being part of that set of discussions. First, good morning and good afternoon, Sam and Johan.
Johan, I'll let you go first, my friend.
All right, sure, yeah. Good morning to you guys as well. Yeah.
So where are you from? So Johan, where are you this week? You're in California?
I'm in California, yeah. A little north of San Francisco, Redding, actually. So.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm in Wisconsin, just outside of the Twin Cities area in Minneapolis.
Very good. So can we go to the map and let's see where everyone else is from? If you haven't yet and you're watching our live stream, please feel free to start checking the boxes and saying hello to us and telling us where you're from. We really would like to know. So we've got Texas represented. Georgia's already in the house. Eastern Europe, although my American education fails me as to which country that is, so I'm going to have to look that up later. All right, so let's talk about the Microsoft ecosystem and what Veeam has contributes to that. First and foremost, when you talk about the Microsoft ecosystem, certainly what everything Microsoft's going to be talking about this week is cloudy, right? And I think there's a lot of confusion that we often hear between the cloud is natively resilient, durable, available, pick your favorite, I don't have to back you up anymore, word, right? And that's actually just not true. Sam, this is something that you have passionately blogged and tweeted and probably even Facebooked about. Talk to us about the difference between resilience and protected.
Yeah, well, certainly blogged about. I don't know about the social media outlets. I try and keep that one down as low as possible. But no, I agree. There are varying degrees of resilience that we can architect in Azure. That can go from single virtual machines that might offer us as much as 95 to I think 99.95% availability, and that might be enough for some applications or workloads. And we can go through the different levels like availability sets, availability zones, even paired regions, and that will give us the holy grail of 5 nines, right? The 99.999% availability by pairing these two different regions, and that I believe equates to just over 4 hours worth of downtime per year. So, you know, the first point that I want to make is that Azure can be architected to be incredibly resilient, incredibly available, but it doesn't necessarily, take away the need to back up, right? Because availability does not necessarily equal, backup. When we architect these varying degrees of resiliency, it's typically through replication. And outage of a Microsoft data center could be one reason that our data becomes inaccessible or lost, but there are a multitude of other reasons, right? Retention policy gaps, accidental deletion, misconfigurations, security, ransomware. If that happens in kind of the source data set, it's just going to be replicated over to the other one, and ultimately we likely have nothing to recover from. Whereas a backup is stored independently of that original data set, of that original disk, and can help us overcome these circumstances of data loss, as well as help with long-term retention for compliance needs, so on and so forth.
Sure. And Johan, you and I have talked about and kind of made fun of, we talk about how data is replicated, right? If you delete data, that deletion in real time is replicated, right? If you corrupt data, that data is corrupted in real time to those other locations, right? So we don't, there's still the need for previous versions, right?
Yeah, no, of course. And if you think about the way that this is done, I mean, on premises, you had all of these tools that you had available to you to make certain things work the way you wanted to. And in the cloud, you have lots of other tools and different functionality available. But the net is that you still have to figure out what you're going to do to protect it, how that works. And then when it comes to it, like if your application is replicating somewhere else, or if you have an on-premises Exchange environment and you had a DAG and you had to lag it a day or two, it's still the same story, right? You're still going to move the copied mistake somewhere else. And so to think about all of these things holistically, I mean, you have to protect your data, even if it's in the cloud, or even if it's a Kubernetes application. Who knows how far you're going to take this? You still have to figure out what are you going to do to protect your data.
Yeah, and there actually is a term that I know Microsoft uses. I think some of the other clouds do as well. The shared responsibility model, right? The concept of Microsoft's job is to stand up the best infrastructure they can, so that you can stand up your applications and your data. And by that means that they're responsible for the quality of the platform, and you are still responsible for your data. All right, let's do this. Let's go to the map because folks have been really, really busy. So I think the record that we had on our last time we had guests on the show was like 22 countries. So the goal is to kind of beat that today. So far we have, so Washington, D.C. is in the house. It's not tax season or anything, is it? Okay, let's see. So Italy, France, Dubai, fun place to visit. Sweden, Germany, Turkey, India's in that. Why is it that we always get folks from India? I just think that's fantastic. Although the little box isn't checked in for them yet. We got to check that. There you go. Thank you to my favorite producer, Mark. Spain, Romania, Senegal, Switzerland. My guess is the folks in Switzerland and the Netherlands that are dialed in are probably listening to make sure that we don't pre-release or leak any information about what's coming, especially our friends in Benelux. And Sam, you should be smiling because you know who I'm talking about on that one. Hi, Mike. We won't release anything yet. Columbus, Ohio, Minneapolis is in the house. South Africa, some of the best meat that you can get in the world outside of Texas, and of course Brazil. All of my favorite meat eaters in one place. So yeah, so please keep the hellos coming on that. All right, so we're talking about cloud. We're talking about being resilient versus protected. Resiliency, protection, backup, recovery, replication, availability, it's all part of that same continuum of data protection. Earlier this year, and this is often something we talk about on this live stream, Veeam asked an unbiased survey of 1,500 enterprises around the world, asking them questions around the state of the IT market and data protection. If we could bring up slide 1 around the data, we did ask a question on what do enterprises believe modern looks like. What does innovative data management or data protection look like for you? And there's kind of two things that kind of jump out depending on whether you're looking at the check all boxes. Those are the brighter blue or green, or the yellowy green is where you can choose just one thing that matters. What is it that makes modern? Sam, this is something that you've spent some time preaching on over time. Talk to us about, what are those top trends as far as what does modern data protection look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great data set. I think when we look for commonalities among these answers that you see on the screen here, these are the top 9 things that people can be considered to be part of a modern data protection. 5 of them are very, very cloud centric, right? So ability to do disaster recovery via a cloud service up there at number 1. Our number 2 and 3 spot are somewhat similar, right? The ability to move workloads from an on-premise data center, whether that is a physical or virtual workload, to the cloud. And number 3 is the ability to move workloads from one cloud to another, right? So I think data portability, flexibility, choice is very important here, not necessarily just focused on the cloud, but the ability to choose there. And then moving a little bit further down, the bottom 2, they're at the bottom, but certainly no less important, is the ability to standardize protection of our on-premises data center, as well as our workloads and data in infrastructure as a service and software as a service. And I think this really speaks to the multi-cloud or hybrid cloud nature of our organizations right now. I think very few organizations are 100% sole sourced on a single cloud, right? Nobody wants to put all of their eggs in one basket. So the ability to manage and protect this data across these different platforms in an efficient way is incredibly important. But again, it all comes down to that flexibility and choice.
Yeah, and when we talk about that, certainly we talk about multi-cloud as an architecture. I realize that this week we're talking about Microsoft Ignite. You could almost make the case that Azure as a hosting platform is a very different set of management responsibilities and provisioning tools than what you would say from, say, Office 365 as a SaaS platform. Azure SQL as a PaaS platform, and then certainly the Microsoft 365, what I still lovingly just call Windows Server and Hyper-V, that on-premise private cloud data center stack. Data centers are not going anywhere, right? So you could argue that those are 4 different architectures and archetypes of clouds, even if it happens to be under, one red, green, orange, blue banner along that way, right? So, Johan, this is something you spent some time with. When we talk about moving data between workloads and that flexibility that we saw in that data point, talk to us about migrating platforms to the cloud, just from your lens.
Right. So I think the goal is that we all, figure out what things are easiest to move, and like especially during this time, there's definitely situations where you want to manage your devices from something more central like Azure, or where you want to have at least your Office 365 part looked after. And then you look at the ransomware attacks and all the other things that are, happening this year, maybe a little bit more because we are working more remotely than we used to. And so you think about all of those components to that. First of all, the data has to get into the cloud. So you might migrate into Office 365, and then what do? You have to back it up the same way you used to before. But also, what happens with the, VMware on premises? Are you going to keep that there? Are you going to maybe move parts of the pieces that are strategic to Azure? And are you going to do that to a VMware-like solution? Or are you going to maybe use Azure Native to start with? And then eventually, yes, the holy grail is to maybe re-architect some of your applications so they are cloud native. But we all know the reality is that it takes time to do that. And
Right.
so the goal really is to take your workloads and make it possible for you to do a myriad of things with them, whether you're restoring to VMware on AWS or Azure or anything like that, because remember, it's all multi-cloud. And remember that Azure also has the ability to manage other cloud providers, which is fascinating. And so there's a lot of stuff to this, if you will.
Yeah, one of our mutual friends, Rick Vanover, talks about the ways that you move VMs and actually take them into the cloud. You can either lift and shift, which means to transform them so they're now hosted in the native hyperscale repository in its normal format, or you can lift but not shift,
Yes.
and that's when you leverage VMware that's then hosted within a hyperscale clouds environment. There are some benefits both ways, right? So there's, cost considerations, but then there's also management plane and what tools do you have for instrumentation? By the way, who's going to live and breathe on it? That kind of thing. Anything else you want to add as far as there's at least 2 different ways to get up there and back?
Right. So with Veeam, you could, use a direct restore to Azure, where you would then turn it into an Azure VM, a native VM, if you had a VM or Hyper-V workload on premises. You could also, now that Azure is making this announcement around the preview version of the Azure VMware solution, you could also keep a lot of the workloads in their native format, but then in the Azure data center. And so that's pretty cool. So that gives you the VMware SCDC and all of the functionality related to it, but then in Azure.
Got it. Sam, you want to anything else you want to add as far as from an IaaS hosting perspective and what folks ought to be thinking about from a transformation?
Yeah, particularly from a data protection and IaaS perspective, I think we've got to appreciate the fact that the way that we protect maybe an on-premises workload is going to be different from infrastructure as a service, right? Veeam carved out that market for protecting virtual machines from physical, right? And an agent-based approach wasn't necessarily the best way to do it. And agents necessarily aren't the best way to protect workloads in the cloud as well. They can be pretty resource intensive. We've got to deploy a lot of them. They're not very scalable or flexible. They're not aware of the environment that they're in. So we need this purpose-built tool set to protect these cloud workloads, right? They're aware of the environment and capable of being elastic and flexible. Utilize automation, make sure that we are adhering to cloud security best practices like isolating backup data from production, and ultimately also being as cost effective as we possibly can, right? One of the key drivers behind, moving production workloads to the cloud is that it can be incredibly cost effective, but in a world where we pay for every ounce of, networking, compute and storage, protecting data, keeping copies of data in the cloud, especially for lengthy periods of time, as might be dictated by compliance, can become very expensive very quickly. So we want a purpose-built tool set that is able to, mimic some of the reasons why we're moving to the cloud, but still protect our data.
Okay, let's talk about that purpose-built tool set. When you roll the clock back about 12 years, what I think one of the things that truly made Veeam innovative and disruptive in the market was when everybody else was talking about generic backup and the generic storage and generic servers, Veeam made a purpose-built backup product for virtualization. And we skipped over those generic IT pros and went straight to the virtualization admin and said, we understand that you are changing the IT landscape, but you're going to need different kind of backup tools to do that. And for last year, we've been doing that same approach for those folks that are managing Azure hosted workloads. We've been going straight to those Azure admins and saying, we understand you are changing that IT landscape based on how you're delivering it, and you need purpose-built tools to do that. And we've been delivering Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure for that. Easily one of the things I am most excited about, I think the most strategic thing Veeam has done in the last 5 years was what we call platform services. If we could bring up the architecture slide for Veeam Backup for the Microsoft Cloud. Sam, walk us through what we're looking at here. Because on the left-hand side, we see that Azure admin native view. And then let's talk about what's so incredibly disruptive and significant about that right-hand side. But walk us through the two halves of this, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they're two halves of a pie, right? And on the left-hand side, we have what we would consider a standalone, cloud standalone backup solution, the ability to back up Azure within Azure. And that might be great for our DevOps guys that, just want to protect what they want to protect and be able to recover in Azure, right? Maybe roll back something to a week or a month ago. We do have some limited recovery options to be able to take what's being developed in Azure and recover that elsewhere. But ultimately, this is a very Azure-centric view, right? Kind of single cloud-centric deployment. But what is really, differentiating for Veeam is on the right-hand side, and our ability to, back up, recover, migrate any workload to any platform. Right, so whether that is on premises, VMware vSphere, Hyper-V, Nutanix AHV, whether those are Amazon EC2 instances in AWS, whether that's Azure VMs in Microsoft Azure, Veeam has that purpose-built tool set to be able to protect each specific workload, but also the flexibility and portability to migrate or recover those workloads across different platforms, and that's all managed by our flagship Veeam Backup and Replication. So we have that unified management platform that no matter where that data lives or where it needs protecting, you're doing it from a single console. And tying it back to that previous slide that we showed with your research, Jason, the ability to standardize on-premises protection with IaaS and SaaS is very much spoken to with this that you see on the right-hand side.
Yeah, I love the fact that research showed that we're actually building the right kind of thing, because in this case, the horse definitely came before the cart on this one. But I got to say, for folks who are watching this one, if you have dedicated Azure admins and you have folks that are living and breathing, standing up infrastructure running in Microsoft Azure, that left-hand side solution, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure, might be all you need, regardless of what you're running in your on-prem data centers, right? But if you go back to that right-hand side of the screen, if you look at, let's bring that one back up one more time. Here's where I think this is really interesting. When you're ready to start moving workloads from on-prem up into Azure, you literally can right-click on a VM or a machine that you've protected on-prem and say, restore to Azure. And restore and migrate start to look really, really similar at that point where you're standing that back up. Or it might be that some of your DevOps guys, they started on Amazon because they used a credit card or whatever. And then when IT operations got a hold of it and said, yeah, you kind of really need a real cloud to go ahead and run in production on. Let's go ahead and move that Amazon workload over to Azure as well. And I'm saying that because it's Microsoft Week, and Azure people, please don't get mad at me. Anyway, so the whole idea is being able to flexibly move those workloads from place to place with a single control plane, all within our flagship data center product of VBR, I think is super cool. Johan, you've spent a lot of time with this, including with with our devs along the way. Hopefully you're as excited as we are on this one.
Absolutely, yes, and it's really interesting to see what we're doing and what we're continuing to do with Microsoft, and the relationship there is a very strong one. We always work on new features with them, as well as, for example, some of the announcements coming with Ignite. But I guess we're being watched by the guy in Belgium, so we shouldn't say too much about those yet.
Not yet. Let's wait till tomorrow, or maybe later in the week to leak that. So okay, so speaking of Belgium, let's go back to the map. So we've gotten quite a few folks that have chimed in. So Tunisia is in the house. Arizona, I have a guest who's there. He's only there in Arizona for a few more days, but that's awesome. He's chiming in. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Nigeria. The last 3 calls we've had folks from Nigeria on as well. So please thank you for joining. Singapore, again, one of my most favorite places to visit. Again, because of the food. Just to be honest about it. Belgium, okay, Mike is watching. Qatar, Mexico, Idaho, Ghana, Seattle, California, Iran. We can almost always count on Iran watching our webcasts on Monday mornings. Peru, London, and Brazil. Again, one of my favorite places to eat meat. Not that there's a trend. I guess I should not do this webcast without having breakfast. All right. So please feel free to keep piling in. I think we're pretty close to, we should ask the producers, but last time I think we were at 22 countries, and I'm hoping that we beat that for this week. Johan, you said something that I think is really interesting when you talked about the partnership between Veeam and Microsoft and how important that is along the way. Unpack a little bit more around, data protection is a partnership. It's built on trust. It's built on mutual respect. It's also built on APIs.
Yes,
Can
it
we
is.
talk about that for a minute?
Right. I think this is one of the weirdest things about going somewhere new. Like, if you think about Veeam back in the day, we supported VMware and Hyper-V. And as you go along, there's a certain set of expectations users have as to what backup is. And also on the platform side, if you think about Azure, the more adoption you get, the more you realize, wait, the adoption of this platform is critical, but it's especially important to make it possible for people to protect the stuff there. And if you can't do that, the platform doesn't grow. And so that's why we have such a tight relationship, because Microsoft realizes it's valuable to invest in APIs and things we need to protect it. But also the users demand it, right? The users know what they need from a legal perspective, and they know what they need to protect themselves in case of a ransomware attack. And so that's where we work very closely, especially on the newer offerings Microsoft releases, because sometimes it's like, okay, so I built this cool thing. Right now, as you were telling the story about VSS earlier, it's like, how many versions after the cool thing is it? Oh, we need to back it up a certain way.
Yeah, so a little history lesson. So back in the early 2000s, I was a Microsoft MVP, and back then, when you wanted to back up SQL, you actually did just an ODBC query, and you just basically dumped the database into a stream and then backed up the stream. Right? When you wanted to back up Exchange, you did a MAPI call. You pretended you were an admin level user, and you just said, "Hey, tell me all the messages in that mailbox again," and then you fed that to a stream. And that was the technical term was butt ugly. I mean, it was just a really bad, non-supported way to back up that data. And so back in like 2005, Microsoft released VSS. So there was the plumbing to really completely and in a supported way back up that data. Right. And then all of a sudden, now we all start leaping over each other, trying to back up to VSS. And how do we still offer differentiable value? And there's a whole bunch of architecture that comes out of that for backup. When Exchange first came out with CCR, SCR before DAG, they originally took out the ability to back up because they said, no, it's natively durable. You don't need backup. And customers say, yeah, we do. Yeah, we still need backup, even if it's natively durable. And so they actually retrofitted VSS back into Exchange 07 after the first beta because resiliency is not the same as backup, which kind of bookends our conversation as well. Here we are, fast forward, and we're in that same place again where not every part of the Microsoft ecosystem has those full rich APIs yet to do backups. But as they do, who's going to back that stuff up? Sam, you got some ideas for us on that?
I don't know. Maybe they're green.
Maybe they're green. Got to be more specific. There's 2 kinds of green in this data protection industry right now.
All right, we'll go this lime green, the beautiful one that you see on the screen right now.
The beautiful lime green.
Yeah. Again, it kind of calls back to that previous slide, right? The ability to protect that data with a purpose-built tool set where it lives right now. The ability to move it to wherever you might need it to go, let's say Azure in this instance, and then once it lands at its new destination, again, the ability to protect it at its new location, right? And again, with the purpose-built tool set. So, as you are on this journey to the cloud, right, and it's a journey that is constantly moving, Veeam is essentially able to help you, protect your data wherever it might be. We are non-prescriptive, right? We're not going out there and telling you, your data should be here or here or here. We just provide that tool set to protect it with the best solutions in the industry, regardless of where it lives. Move it as your organization sees fit, in line with their needs, and then protect it there as well. And I think that's a technological piece, but what's often overlooked is it from a licensing schema, right? Because if we have multiple tool sets or solutions to protect these workloads with traditionally a license that is locked into a specific product, as we move a workload to a new location, we might need to procure a new product, and that original license becomes redundant. It can become very expensive. And Veeam pioneered this wonderful thing called the Veeam Universal License, right? So it's as non-specific as you kind of need your data to be, and it's just going to move between the Veeam platform, the various components of the Veeam platform, as the data moves. I think it's hugely advantageous and a big cost-effective play as well.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and bring that up. So we have a slide on the breadth of the Veeam Microsoft ecosystem. And so some of the things that we've talked about over the hour, and it's got 3 minutes to the bottom of the hour, so we should probably try to wrap it up. But you're looking at, for those workloads that you have completely moved from on-prem as a workload to the cloud, like Microsoft Office 365, including not just Exchange, but also SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams, et cetera, we have Veeam Backup for Office 365. When we talked about where we came from, right? So that's on that right-hand side. You see Veeam's flagship product, Veeam Backup and Replication. That includes support for physical servers running Windows and Linux and Solaris and AIX, and of course, all the major hypervisors, Hyper-V, as well as VMware and Nutanix as well. And then that middle of that screen, what Johan talked about earlier is as we really move towards real native cloud-based hosting, we also get into Azure native VMs, and for that we protect with Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure as well. So regardless, so what Sam mentioned is those licenses are going to move back and forth, and more importantly, as Johan recognized earlier, data is going to move back and forth. Your workloads are going to bounce around a little bit, and oh, by the way, they might even start off in some other cloud before they end up over here. Especially because as you think about like DR scenarios and migration and certainly economics as well. All right, so we have 1 minute left for the session today. We do have a QR code in the bottom right-hand corner. Please feel free to check out everything that we're going to be covering at Microsoft Ignite. And basically just it's a web page that includes the entire portfolio of the Veeam Microsoft partnership. Hey, by the way, congratulations to us both, or us three. 25 countries represented today. So we beat last week's call. So thank you for Munich in Germany. Thank you for Argentina. Thank you for Pakistan, and Atlanta gets the final nod as far as places that got added in. We got a lot of stuff at Microsoft Ignite. We've got Ask the Expert sessions, tabletops, breakouts, and then Johan and I are doing a webinar at the end of the month, going into demos on everything that we're just going to talk about at Ignite. We're going to be showing in some really fun details and including a few new things, hopefully next month. So please make sure to check out the webpage. Sam, Johan, thank you so much for joining us this week. Good luck to us all for a big week at Microsoft Ignite. And to the folks at home, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.